I was getting grief for not doing this, so I'm actually remembering this time, which is fabulous. Alright.
So may I begin when I wish to? Are members of the opposition ready? Members of the government? Audience? All right. This House supports time travel. This House, for the purpose of this argument, is the United Nations. Now, this is an interesting issue because we're talking about an incredible technology, something leaps and bounds ahead of anything we've achieved so far, but we know it's possible, and we can work to create it. Now, I want to start talking about the sort of regulations that would be necessary. First, we already understand we can regulate dangerous objects. We are very good at regulating nuclear weapons currently, for example. Also, one of the most important regulations we'll be talking about, we'll be going into, is the fact that we will be only working on moving forward in time. Now, you might try to make some argument that, slippery slope argument from the opposition that, oh, it's going to lead to backwards time travel, which can be harmful. But I want to point out that anything that bad has happened in the past, that any crazy terrorist has done, has caused the world we're in now. So actually, crisis averted, everything that's bad has happened. If they had done it, it's already done. We don't have to worry about that. It's not going to add any new problems. So what problems do we want to address? Well, we believe that we first need to set up a treaty. We, the United Nations, will set up a treaty because to bring all the countries together, because the future of humanity belongs to all of us. And next, we're going to have a special science team that's in charge of putting everything together. And they're in charge of this very important operation. And specifically, the great harm we see in society today are climate deniers. Now bear with me. This is why it's very important. They're claiming in the future there's going to be no problem, whereas many scientists agree this is the greatest threat facing humanity currently, ecologically. It goes like this. Climate change leads to environmental disasters, worse tornadoes, droughts, and floods. This can lead to economic disasters as there's scarcer resources. This will lead to conflict, more poverty, potentially world wars. Currently we're keeping that off because of the current balance. The balance would be away. And that, if we go forward and see the trouble with it, we can convince that climate deniers bring the governments of the world together and thus avert one of the greatest disasters possible. And also get a little few insights into other great disasters that might come, like hurricanes or a great dust bowl in Africa that wipes out the food for an entire continent. I'll take your point in a moment. Now, I want to go into into the model. How does this money come about? We're the United Nations. We're not going to tax countries. We're going to ask countries to donate. We believe this is very practical. Many countries donate to causes in the cause of saving humanity. Seems like it's worth a few dollars, I'd say. Furthermore, this will be policed by all nations. No nation wants to see any other nation gain an advantage. This will only be used for specific operations. It's something that will be self-policing very easily. Next, the type of travel we're going to do is a portal time travel. It's going to open up a future that we can pass through. It will be a sterile room where future scientists and leaders will give a short brief only on the ecological disasters that we face in all humanity. They will then step back. Now they're going to argue that you're going to accidentally sleep with your grandmother in the past and become your grandmother, and you're going to have a Futurama situation. This is not the case. We're only going forward, and strictly speaking, there will be no inbreeding whatsoever. First world time travel. Number 2, bring a towel. Now, the important part here is we find out the problems, bring it back, give the brief, and we have the actions to move forward. And this will be confined to a special cell that will be perfectly contained to give this information. They'll take your point.
Okay, well, aside from the incest, your plan assumes that time actually travels in a linear formation. What if it's more like a rug or, a drop of water in a pan? How would you deal with that? Wouldn't the future that you're traveling to actually be someone else's past?
That's interesting, but here's what we're going to be addressing. We actually already thought of this, because we too have seen movies like Inception. All possible realities are sort of going out, that we are only going to be looking at the reality as the way the ball is currently rolling. This still actually moves to our argument, because if we're going to see that the current path we're going for is going to cause massive climate change and damage, that would be the future we're seeing. So the future we're changing is our future, not the future we see, preventing the future that we did see. We can then send another team. Did you guys get that? I'll repeat it one last time. Hardest part of time travel, trying to figure out what you're doing. So what happens is you will be able to go to one of the futures that's potential in front of you. When you see that, you can take the information back and then change what your path is going to be. So the future you see will not ultimately be your future because you've changed it at its source originally. Kind of like diverting a river, seeing where the river goes. So you move the river is no longer going there. So what you're going to be able to see is it can work with multiple types of futures, and we can still solve the problems of today. So I hope that was understandable. I had to repeat it a bit. Other So finally, what this is ultimately going to do is it's going to allow humanity to come together on an issue. We all agree that we want to save humanity. We all want to work together. We all want to make something better. What we're arguing today is what are the actual problems? What are the things that are going to be destroying humanity? Because we can't agree on these facts. We see conflicts over it. We see mistrust. We see climate change deniers. This will move us to where we need to go. This will allow us to see what is on the horizon to correct for humanity. And as I said, the future belongs to all of humanity. This is why it's a UN project. This is why it's put under a special science team, so it's away from politics in that way. They will be able to work with us and we'll be able to control it. It's a confined situation belonging to all of humanity, everyone policing it. You have a personal incentive to see that this isn't used wrong. You'll be doing this. Presidents will be running saying, I'm the best to police to make sure this is going to go correctly. This will become a global effort from every single level to move humanity forward. And once we get the facts of the disasters and the troubles facing humanity, we will be better prepared to solve it. I mean, I'm assuming the opposition doesn't disagree that knowing what the problems are going to be are going to make it harder to actually solve the problems. And I'm projected time. So with this understanding, we can make more informed, better decisions and move humanity forward. So because climate change is a major threat to humanity, because we can create time travel, because we can regulate as we regulated before, because they laid out a plan that would be able to solve this, we are very proud to propose.
Are now called the leader of the opposition.
I think this topic came about because as we went through our rounds, we actually realized that we regretted a lot of things that we said in our and thus the topic why we need to have time travel. So hopefully maybe we could redeem ourselves in some way, maybe even get to the final round, or not get to the final round, which was actually kind of my own go. But anyways, I'd like to first critique the plan on this ridiculous notion like the UN is able to resolve like even have the ability to resolve these kind of issues, and then moving on to just overall ideas on how it's going to be, 1, detrimental to the timeline, 2, it's going to be affecting humans, and 3, on how it's going to lead to a detriment of society and governance. So first of all, I'd like to critique the idea of how UN is somehow the best agent in being able to resolve these issues of climate change and saving humanity as such. First of all, the UN does not, they accept donations and they don't even get enough money to save people dying of treatable illnesses. Pills, for example, that only cost like 2 cents. So I don't see how they're actually going to get the donations or the generation to resolve those, the idea of space travel or whatever. So moving on is on how all these issues that they bring up, climate change and humanity, can be resolved through other means, and therefore time travel is not the best solution or a realistic solution, and therefore it's actually going to lead to all the detriments that I'm going to be listing. I'd also like to note on how this should be compared to the idea of space exploration. So eventually what we're going to have with the international community, they come and collaborate, they have money, and then we go into space. However, we notice on how the knowledge that we get from space only benefits the elite. They only benefit the few. And so we see on how it's not actually going to lead to these overall worldwide benefits. It's actually going to lead to more harm than good, especially for those who are in minority-like status. Now, I would like to first I'd like to first bring up the idea of the timeline effect. As my partner has brought, time isn't really linear because what's our future is somebody's past and so forth. And so therefore, the idea of just using the technology might disrupt the overall flow of it. So the technology, especially if we don't know if it's well equipped, it might lead to more detriment than good. Have you ever heard of, I think everyone's seen like the butterfly effect, where just a small little mistake might actually lead to consequences that we didn't even intend, so it causes more harm than good. Moving on to the idea of how, actually I'll take your point.
How does the butterfly effect, which has to do with actions leading to new actions, going to really affect us if we're only going forward in time? Doesn't that only work from backwards to forward?
It would be affecting someone else's past, because as my partner had brought up, is on how it's, this is not just linear. So if we go forward, then yeah, that's our future, how it's going to disrupt someone else's past, and therefore we can see on how people might get upset. I think a really good example of this is like South Park, where the future people come back to the past and they try to observe and stuff, and you end up taking your jobs and such. Or the other idea about time wars, we have people trying to erase the other before the other one can erase them. So you can see on how this is going to cause more harm than good. Also the idea of how it creates an unstable present and a very volatile one, because as my partner said, this is a very realistic situation. When we have this technology available, we're not going to limit to ourselves to only the future. We're going to go to the past, because for example, I'm pretty sure everyone who voted for Mitt Romney is like going to want to go to the past and somehow like undo like Hurricane Sandy to maybe get more votes or something like that. Or even the idea of like altruistic individuals who regretted like jumping on a grenade. It's like, oh shit, I shouldn't have done that. So you have those kind of situations. So we see how it's going to lead to disruption in the timeline. Second is on how it's going to be detrimental to humans. Because when you have a very volatile, unstable present, it leads to psychological harms, abuses. It's going to lead to a fluid perception of what is reality and what is not real, because it's always changing. I know reality is subjective, but can you imagine one moment where, I don't know, you're a wealthy billionaire, owner of Fox News, and all of a sudden you're on the streets of Miami begging for money. And then all of a sudden you're in Hawaii somehow because they shipped you to Hawaii. So you can see how it's going to lead to more harm than good. It's going to cause some psychological effects. It's going to be affecting behavior, and for all we know, we might have more homeless people on 4th Street Mall. I'm sorry, but we don't want anymore. It's like becoming a little too crowded. Yes, I'll take your point.
As I pointed out before, anyone who's gone back in time and muddled with it, the changes happened. Before we know, they've already changed it so Barack Obama was elected because Mitt Romney was going to lead to worse climate change. For a joking example. So we're already in the world that was created by time travel being in the future, because that's the only world that could possibly be now.
Thank you. Now let's move on. Okay, so I'm running out of time, so I'd like to get to my third point, which is the idea of how it's going to lead to a totalitarian society. This might sound really big, but if you've seen Minority Report, we have a situation where people go into the future. They believe that, oh, if we can see the future, we can prevent the crime. So they lock up the people before they actually do the crime, and this leads to a totalitarian state. And then also Tom Cruise becomes a hero, and so essentially what it's going to have is it's going to have more injustice, especially those, it's going to end up oppressing those of minority status, people who can't really represent themselves. It's going to lead to a colonization of people who are of minority status. So basically, it's going to be a colonization of the past and the future. Essentially, what I want you to get out of today's debate is on how time travel is not a good thing because it can disrupt the timeline, it can affect humans, it can affect society and governance, and also the idea of how there are advantages that they want to claim through exploration with climate change and humanity, and it can be solved without time travel. It can be solved through, I don't know, like our Esther who went to Rwanda and is building mud huts. You could do that. Or the other idea of how you can just recycle cans, like my partner who had like 16 cans in California because she refused to recycle it without a bin. So what I want you to get out of today's debate is on how we shouldn't support time travel, especially for harms that can be resolved otherwise.
Opposition and call the member of government.
My judges, opponents, and partners, are you ready? Cool. Yeah. So my opponents say that they want to change this debate by going to the past. I too want to change this debate by going to the past, but I can't. I'm not allowed to go to the past. Read our motto. I can't go to the past. So sorry, you can't change this debate. You have to be here. You have to be winning. Okay, so... No, winning. So basically, here's the problem, right? They said that what if people go to the past and they change everything, right? And they disrupt the flow of time. I have a problem with that because as Ian told you, everything that's in the past has already happened. Here's what happened, okay? They said, what if people go to the past to save Mitt Romney's candidacy and revitalize it? The Republicans take party and everything gets, I don't know, better. Here's what happened. Here's what actually happened. Okay, so someone actually came from the future to right now, and they diverted history. But someone also who was an Obama supporter from the year 2025 actually came back to the past with him and shot him. So it's gone. I'm sorry. Yeah, you have a point.
What if someone doesn't ratify your treaty and wants to build their own time machine?
Right, so here's the thing, right? You have a lot of things about how the UN is a bad actor for this. We think that the UN doesn't have a lot of donations for illnesses because people don't really care about illnesses. People care about nukes. People care about things that will destroy the Earth, and you've already demonstrated to us how this time travel technology can destroy the Earth. So we think that people will have a vested interest in actually trying to police it a little bit. Okay, so moving on to their actual points. They had 3 points. First, the UN can't solve. 2, it will disrupt the flow of time. I don't think they actually understand that point, but let's move on to that. And 3, Minority Report. I too watch movies. Okay, first, the UN can't solve. Yes, the UN is a terrible, awful, ineffective organization, but countries with vested interests do what their interest tells them to do, and therefore we're going to have a good system for this, okay? We don't think that countries will want to have a gaining system over each other, and we think that if this technology is really as dangerous as they say, they're going to nuke any country that tries to do anything with this technology. They will be scared out of their wits, and they will try to stop any country meddling with this. Okay, moving on from there. They said that this will only benefit the elite. I just don't see how they're going to only benefit the elite if we're telling you we're going to shut up climate deniers. I just think that this is a bigger impact here. I think that it benefits everyone, okay? So they also said that it's hard for the, yeah, basically, whatever. Okay, so second point, disrupts the flow of time, right? So here's the deal, right? I think that even if time travel doesn't get invented, even if time travel does get invented, but we can't regulate it, there are 2 benefits here, right? The first benefit is that we're going to have a treaty so that whether or not time travel does or does not exist, we have a treaty like the IAEA that will actually stop people from abusing it. So even if we don't invent the great big weapon, we have a treaty to stop the great big weapon at the risk that it will be invented, okay? The second benefit that we have is that even if this is a completely different time portal, this is a different future that is unrelated to our own, if there is climate change in that future and we bring it back to the climate deniers, even if that future is a lie, that means that we're convincing them to stop climate change, okay? So, yes, you have a point.
A treaty is equivalent to a pinky promise. Can you guarantee that these people are going to actually listen to it or
Yes,
not?
because you think that it's scary and I do too, and so does every other nation. Okay? So, I think that we basically stopped there. Mitt Romney becomes president point. I agree that's a big impact. I know you had to go for big impacts, but sorry. So anyway, they also said something about getting rich quick through past time travel. We're not going to allow that. This is going to be a very regulated technology. Moving on to their third point, which is Minority Report. Their biggest impact into this is that Tom Cruise could be a hero in another movie. I agree, this is a concern. So, here, right, they say that they're going to use this technology to colonize minorities. I'm not sure how they got to that. I still think Tom Cruise is a bigger impact. But more than that, I think that, like, seriously, if all we're saying is that we don't want to have climate change, so we're willing to buy into the lie. Even if climate change doesn't exist in our future, if it exists in someone else's future that we can find, and we can convince these climate change deniers that it does exist, we can stop climate change no matter what. Yes?
Okay, well, I think it's cool you're willing to lie to make your point. But
Yes.
let me move on to my question, which is the idea of, since regulations work so well, why does the FDA constantly approve products that are dangerous for us? And with time travel, doesn't this make it a lot more dangerous if regulations aren't followed?
Right, so exactly as I said, the more stakes that this technology brings, the more likely these treaties are to work. So we agree with you that treaties have problems, they have holes in them, but I think that the FDA is faulty because we genuinely as a society don't care about good food. We genuinely as a society don't care about things that work. That's why we like placebos, that's why we like cable TV, that's why we like McDonald's, okay? So moving on. Look, here, I just think that we're talking about bigger issues here. I think that this can be regulated. More importantly, I think that the stopping of a resource war by proactively finding out information that will convince people to get away from inaction, that will convince the public that they should be doing something for the world, that will galvanize us to have a better future, to imagine a better future, to imagine that there is consequences to our actions and we should do something proactively to change that. I think that is good. That is why we propose this motion. That is why we're going to go forward with it. Thank you.
I'm really glad today that we managed to have discussion with the team that is now known as FATE. and their ability to rather decide our future and look into our future and know exactly what's going to happen at every point in the future. And really what we come at is the idea of all-knowingness, omniscience about the future. And what does that really provide for us in the present day, and whether it's a benefit to us. So some of the things that I'm really going to be talking about is this idea of how their model is inherently flawed, how they even have a logical flaw in the priority of what they're trying to accomplish, and more importantly, how the technology they're really pursuing is going to screw us all over in the end and result in almost a Cold War type scenario, which is extremely detrimental to society and what I would argue is even more worse than climate change. So the first thing we really need to look at is this issue of the UN. And when it comes to treaties, the UN isn't all that great at getting everyone to adhere to principles. Things like nuclear proliferation, for instance, is not ratified by every single nation in the world. In fact, people pursue proliferation because they view it as pursuing their own national interests. They do it because it's great for their country, not because it's benefit to the world. Honestly, if I were in the United States position and I saw this type of thing coming out of the UN, I would be like John F. Kennedy. I wouldn't say, oh yeah, sure, we should all go into space at once. I'd say, hell no, we should beat the Soviet Union. We should build a time machine faster than they can. We should figure out what they're going to do. And then we should pursue our own interests. We should drill oil faster than they can. We should screw up the world faster than they can. That they're going to reach later than us, but sure, I'll take your point.
Exactly. That's why we have to establish this treaty long before any of these questions occur.
Oh, come on, we're Americans. Like, that's really... Are you kidding me? Hello? We don't even agree with the UN on half the issues that come into play with national treaties. Like, honestly, the whole world isn't going to suddenly agree to your plan, and the fact of pursuing climate change as being something everyone agrees on is also inherently flawed. For example, if we're going to be looking at the future, why don't we examine what countries are going to do to pursue nuclear weapons? Why don't we try to dissuade them? I think nuclear holocaust is a more likely threat in the present right now than climate change, which we don't know when it's necessarily going to happen. And the other thing we really need to look to is there are multiple scenarios for the world ending. Like, honestly, we shouldn't just be prioritizing climate change, we should be looking at other scenarios as well if we were to support this, but we shouldn't. So moving on to some of the other things they talked about, which was like, yeah, we're going to be going into the future. I have this idea of time being not linear. Essentially, it all occurs at the exact same moment. It's like a stream, and it's merely where you're standing in the stream is your perception of time. There's water going down the entire thing, and that's just merely time. Someone else is experiencing reality in the future exactly at the same moment we are. So when we want to go into the future and examine it, we are inherently changing someone's past. We are screwing them over in the future for us, and in the past for them. We might erase someone's existence with this plan. We might erase some other positive benefit with this plan. We have no way of measuring and having a determinative calculus of where this plan will lead us. We don't even know where we're going to be going in the future under the Like, honestly, are we going 500 years? Are we going 2 days? Like, what? I want to know. The other thing we really need to look at is this whole idea of psychological harm. Like, under this plan, what is a human individual going through time going to experience? I mean, I'm pretty sure all right now we're totally mind-blown over this subject. Like, I just talked about time being the stream, a really abstract notion. I'm pretty sure there's at least more than one person in this room who is totally lost. And that would include myself. Basically what we have is this idea of the individual messing with time is going to really screw up their mind. My partner has already presented this type of logic where if we're jumping around all the time, a person's sense of reality slowly starts to degrade where the point we have more psychological harms on the part of scientists who we put so much trust in this plan. The other thing we really need to look at is this idea of totalitarian society and the ability to do it with the information we have and manipulate the future. Now, this arrives at the idea of the UN is not going to be able to regulate everyone. People are going to build their own time machines. I'm pretty sure someone somewhere in the world is going to try to build one in their backyard. I probably will. Basically, the fact is that it's going to lead to a time war. There's going to be countries that are going to try to change things. The United States is probably going to pursue its interests. Russia's probably going to try to pursue its interests. Iran is probably going to pursue its interests. There's going to be all of these countries trying to do their own nationalist policies, and it's going to lead to a time war. This is a much worse scenario than climate change due to the fact that they're all pursuing their own nationalistic nationalistic interests, and that's inherently bad. Why do you disagree?
Right, so we can't change that guy's past in the future because in his future they've already invented time travel, so his past is already changed.
But the whole issue is that there's no one actor for time travel. If we already have the technology, what stops us from pursuing multiple parallel realities? Like, what stops us from creating parallel universes and screwing over a whole host of different people and doing all sorts of things that are, like, incredibly bad? The whole point of space-time is the fact that we cannot manipulate it. I think that's a great thing. We shouldn't be supporting time travel because we should be resolved in the fact that we are living in a firm, sort of concrete reality that we do have the power to change. Like, if we really wanted to take action on such a substantive issue, we should have discussions of it and not just try to jump to the conclusion. We shouldn't be trying to jump to conclusions, but rather resolve our individual differences and try to come through consensus in the present day rather than having to resort to the future and look to see what the outcome is. I would rather live in a present day in which I don't know my own individual fate than live in a present day governed by a type of time distortion in which I know what I'm going to be doing. That eliminates all of the freedoms we have as individuals, and we really don't have the ability to change that. So I don't think that this House should support time travel. Thank you.
All right, thank you, ladies and gentlemen, judge and jury. I'm here on behalf of the polar bears who advocate for the implementation of time travel to save their species. We think that's important. So we've heard a lot of interesting concepts up here today. We've talked about what time means, and obviously not everybody in here understands. We think that's fine. Leave it up to the government. We'll solve it for you. But what I want to do today is really boil this down to 3 essential issues. What is this all about? Well, first, can we ever understand time travel? Well, I'd like to have more faith in humanity than to say that we can't. I think that we're intelligent beings, we're rational actors. If it's something that we put our mind to, we will figure out time travel. Hopefully you guys will be on board with that. Secondly, what will this ultimately save the polar bears? I think that we've shown you a great model for how time travel will end the naysayers. We think that climate deniers are akin to the Holocaust deniers. They're just a dying breed that won't exist in the future, and we think that's because of our model today. Finally, will this alter our free will like the opposition will lead you to believe? I don't think it will, but before I get into that, I'm going to go into a few points of rebuttal. So I think John dealt pretty well with the UN being a bad actor, right? Well, the UN hasn't done things right in the past. Well, what we say is, there's a vested self-interest from everybody to police the UN. We think that with that vested self-interest, the UN will become a good actor in this matter. We think that, furthermore, they say that, time travel is not the only way, but let's agree, time travel is the most awesome way. If you could fix global warming by digging holes and planting trees, or if you could fix global warming by going to the future, I'm pretty sure we'd all agree that going to the future is very silly. And think about this, if we could bring back like teleportation or any number of good inventions from the future, wouldn't you agree that that also would be something good? So they say that, yeah, well, shouldn't we be focusing on, nukes, or shouldn't we be focusing on trying to save things like that? Okay, fine, we'll also look for nuclear holocausts in the future, we'll prevent those now as well. But before I go on, why can't time travel stop nuclear holocausts?
Yeah, so I'm wondering with your plan, what if the climate deniers are right, and then we end up not doing anything when we come back to the present, which creates climate change?
Well, I don't think that paradoxical universe will happen by going to the future to find out there's no climate change. I think we'll come back and be like, hey, we're on the right track, keep it up, America. I think that to the extent that where you guys are saying time is not definable, I think that as I'm standing here today, I know the things that I've done in the past, but I don't know the things I've done in the future. And I'd say that's a pretty linear definition of time. Not at this time. But in the future, I may take you. So Justin was really curious about where we're going to go with this time travel. Is it going to be 5 years? Is it going to be 10 years? Is it going to be 2 minutes? Let's go everywhere. Let's find out everything that's possibly going to happen, and then we'll solve for it. But we're making a better future for everybody. And this is what I have to say to somebody else's, some entity in the future having its past affected. I say that our future is more important than any amorphous figure in the future's past being messed with. So another thing is their future doesn't exist their past doesn't exist without our future. So think about that. You know, they also brought up the stuff about, you know, totalitarian society and this Minority Report. We're not discovering mind reading. We're doing time travel here. So I don't think that just by time traveling we're gonna figure out a way to get Justin's question out easier.
What if you blow a hole in the universe?
Okay, well, what if Tom Brady stops doing his football thing and I don't know, brain thinking and some book reading is not really what I'm going. Okay, so what have we figured out today? We figured out that, you know, sometimes plans can be debated, but ultimately we think that for the greater good of society, for the greater good of mankind, and for the continuity of our species, it is ultimately important to figure out as much as we can about times to come and to make sure that we do this in the most respectful way, the most cautious way. We think that we've laid that out pretty well. And we think that through this model, through our plan, and through the endeavors that we've decided to undertake, we will be rational actors in this situation. We will decide how to move forward in this in the most humanly proficient manner possible. So, can we ever understand time travel? I think that we can. We're going to be initiating treaties. We're going to be contracting the world's smartest scientists, whatever you want to do to make sure that this goes down in a manner that's respectable by all. We think that through our continued strive for knowledge and hunger for things unknown, we'll figure out the time travel. We'll figure out how to make it happen, and we're implementing systems to make sure that when we do figure it out, it's not just going to be chaos. I doubt Justin will ever be able to build a time travel machine in his backyard, but
Shame.
unless you're one of the contracted scientists, but we don't know. Okay. So ultimately, this will end conflicts worldwide. This will end global warming. This will save the polar bears. I mean, your hearts have to go out for the polar bears. Their homeland is being diminished at an alarming rate, and we think this is completely apart. Shame on you guys for fighting against the polar bears. And furthermore, I don't think this will alter our free will, because what if people are traveling back now? I'm still going to have the same determination to make the same silly mistakes that I'm doing now. I'm still going to say ridiculous things up in front of public, and I think that will continue to happen regardless of time travel. So, because we think that, you know, we're rational actors, we're intelligent beings, we think that time travel is the most awesome way to deal with any problem known to man, and because we are on side polar bear and we believe in free will, we are extremely proud to propose time travel in our day and age. Thank you.
We'll erase that when we go back in time. Hey everyone. So if you've ever seen a time travel movie, you know that there's one common denominator in all of them. The person who travels through time is crazy. And it's obvious that the proposition team has drunk the Kool-Aid in this situation, since they are obviously supporting time travel, because the solution to climate change, everyone, is time travel. As we all know, it's the obvious solution to every problem in the world, #America. So, today, during this debate, we've talked about a lot of things, but I kind of want to boil it down to three main things. First of all, why there can only be one Highlander. 2, how do all time travel movies end? And lastly, why climate change has nothing to do with time travel, guys. So let's go with the first one. Why there can only be one Highlander. Obviously, I'm not talking about Highlander, but it's the closest thing I can think of to time travel. Parallel universe? It works out. Okay, so first of all, we're going to go with their plan, which is talking about the United Nations creating a system. Because obviously, governments work so well together in the past, and we'll obviously be able to create a time travel mean that we'll all use equally and personably, and sharing is caring. However, the situation doesn't always work like that. In fact, the United Nations is completely inefficient, as they pointed out several times in their case. Thank you for doing that, so I didn't have to. So we know that the United Nations can't do this, and as Justin stated in his last speech, we're going to create a time war which will ultimately lead to the destruction of all humanity, because there will be a race to create time machines in our backyard with every single country in the world, just like there was a race to create nuclear weapons, something that is less important than climate change in this situation specifically. It's creating a struggle for power, and unfortunately we don't know where that power will end up, and as Cassie pointed out in her first speech, a lot of times that power will end up in, as I quote, the hands of the United Nations, who operate, completely altruistically all the time, or the hands of these mad scientists who are agreeing to build a time machine for the government in the first place? I'll take your question.
Okay, so are you saying, because you're pointing out nuclear weapons, that we would have been better off if the UN had no treaties whatsoever? You're saying that time travel is going to be happening, aren't the treaties better? Wouldn't they help with the nuclear weapons? And if your time war happens and they destroy the universe, how do you know the explosion didn't create our universe through the Big Bang?
I just have a problem with the government being, or a global governance system like the United Nations, being able to control such an expressive power like a time machine. You keep talking about how we won't go into the past, but the problem is when people go into the past, the only people who realize there's a difference in the present are the people who come back from the past. How will we even know if the United Nations is going into the past and changing our past when we won't be able to tell the difference? Because that happens all the time in time travel movies. So we need to keep that in mind when we're looking at this hard evidence that we have brought up from Doctor Who. So now I'm going to talk about the struggle between power in these, or now I'm going to move on to my second point, which is about how do all time travel movies end? And I've constructed a little nifty list that I would like to read. First of all, there's explosions. They're the destruction of all humanity. People die, main characters die, or go crazy. It reverts back to the alternate timeline, or we create an alternate universe or timeline. So in all these situations, we have a situation which ends up being worse than before. No matter what you say and how we're going to regulate it and regulate it and regulate it, that's great, but we're still eating lead in our food from China, which is not that great because regulations don't always work. I understand it's a different actor, it's a metaphor, sit down. So, what we're looking at in this time travel is that all these endings are never good. Time travel movies don't end happily, except for that awful one with Adam Sandler and the remote. Like, we're talking about real world, adult, reality time travel, which is the thing. So when we're looking at it in today's society, we understand that it links back to everything we said before. That we're going to have governments who have all these power, who have the power to control us without us even knowing it, who have the power to go into the future and kill possible future people who exist. No, we will not have sex with our grandmas, but you might bang your daughter. Really? Okay, baby Thor. Let's move on. So when we're talking about today's debate, I'll take your question.
Right, so disregarding the fact that we're clearly watching different movies, how fast are nukes actually proliferating in the world today?
How fast are nukes? Not very quickly, but I definitely think Iran has some. I don't want them with a time machine. Just personally, I'd rather not have China or North Korea or Germany have a time machine, guys. It's not fun. So I'm kind of running out of time, so let's move on to my last point, which is why climate change has nothing to do with time travel. Cassie mentioned a great point in her speech when she started to talking about how this is really the lazy way out, guys. It's called let's not do today what we can do tomorrow by creating a time machine. The ultimate procrastination. Good job, everyone. So what we're looking at today is a solution to something that will possibly happen in the future, but we already know that it's slowly occurring now. If we really want to create change, if we really want to save the polar bears and not screw up the space-time continuum in the process, let's start by recycling our water bottles. There's one outside. We can start this now, and we don't have to build a time machine and end in global destruction. This seems like a good plan. So when we're looking at the only pro that they brought up is climate change, and while I love big fluffy polar bears, I kind of like humanity a teensy bit more, and I'd rather not all this blow up and, a rip in the space whole time thing. Wibbly wobbly space things. So, what we're talking about today, we can see that obviously the method that the proposition has brought up is the ultimate procrastination method of them being extremely lazy in solving climate change, while on the con, we're saying we want to be steadfast, proof to everyone they're wrong. Americans can make a difference without blowing up a country, and that's why we want to do this. Secondly, we see that there can only be one Highlander, which is why it's a bad idea to create an international treaty where you consolidate the power over a very, very dangerous weapon of mass destruction. Yes, I'm going there. I want to question. And the last thing we're talking about is how all time travel movies end very badly, which is why when we look to the future, I want it to be a future that I create and not the UN. Thank you.